So thank you all for joining. Today on the Growth Clinic, we're going to talk all about the state of SEO in 2022. And some of you may know this, some of you may not, but back in 2009, when Web Mechanics was founded, we were a pure play SEO shop. So we were founded as an SEO firm. SEO is something that's very near and dear to our hearts and something that we're very passionate about, still practice heavily to this day with our clients. I guess to kick us off, to get the conversation rolling, Chris, maybe talk a little bit about what you've seen, how far we've come. Like since 2009, what are the big things that have changed and what's different about SEO today and what's stayed the same?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just a quick intro. I'm Chris. I'm one of the co-founders here at Web Mechanics. We appreciate all you guys coming out today. This is our weekly growth clinic. We call it the Growth Clinic, or TGC. And it's basically designed to foster a sense of community, to bring folks together to add value. And normally it's Jarrett kind of interviewing me or somebody else for the first segment. And then we're going to break it out and open it up for questions. So we welcome your toughest SEO questions as soon as we get through the intro period. But for the time being, you guys can just hang out, listen in. I know it's probably lunch hour for many of you on the East Coast. So if you want to munch away, feel free. But a lot has changed in SEO, obviously. I mean, since I started in 2005, right? And in those days, it was actually quite easy, meaning that like you could basically do a little bit of keyword research. You could just keyword stuff your pages and your title tags, and you would often be able to rank on pretty competitive terms. So those were the glory days of SEO. I think we're far beyond that. We'll never get them back. The big thing on SEO is that it's much harder to rank these days. And the reasons are plentiful, but it all comes back to relevance, trustworthiness. And so you'll see on a lot of the highest traffic terms, you'll see a lot of larger, well-known brands like dominating those search engines or the search results pages. And there are some things that you can do to earn those rankings on those competitive keywords, even if you're not a massive brand. But also, one thing that has stayed the same largely is the opportunity in the tail. So the long tail, meaning longer search queries that are like 3 words or more, they might come in the question variety, or they might come in other, more specific terms, modifiers added to head terms, and so on. That's always been an area of great interest that you could always win on SEO wise. But if you pay attention as you're Googling around yourself, you'll see for a lot of those longer tail, more specific queries, you'll see not very recognizable brands showing there. There's been a lot else that's changed. I mean, we could go on there for a long time. I think that for me, my SEO philosophy in general, ever since having first started, was I've always been very user focused, because I know, and that's a way to really future proof your strategy. Like if you solve for the user first and foremost, but then also pay attention to the search engines, understand what they like, understand how they are processing information and sort of viewing the world. That's the best, that's the best of both, or that's the best combination of ingredients, because then you really don't need to worry that much. I mean, you'll still watch the algorithm changes, you'll still monitor your ranks and how things are fluctuating. But if you're constantly solving for the user, then you're future-proofing your SEO strategy in that way. So the way that I used to think and still think about SEO, like the very simplistic view of the world, is that you've got your on-page stuff. This is stuff like your page titles, your URLs, your description, the visible elements on your page, the content that you're creating, the way that you're linking back and forth between those pages. So you've got on-page, you've got off-page. These are signals on third-party websites that basically are like credibility jolts. So off-page is synonymous with link building, it used to be called. Then somebody got fancy and called it backlink acquisition, and then they call them referrals and citations, and they're trying to say all these things other than just like go build some links. But really, that's what it is still at the end of the day. Offsite is really about backlink acquisition and getting those votes of credibility. And then there's technical. So technical refers to the elements of your website that are not visible to the naked eye. And these are things like, the actual code that your pages are built with, things like redirects and canonicalized URLs, duplicate content issues, more of like the technical side of things. So Google, generally speaking, has de-emphasized some of the on-page ranking factors over the last like decade or so. They've gradually de-emphasized some of the on-page and are gradually emphasizing more and more the backlinks, the citations, and the technical elements of SEO, such as site speed, load times, things like above the fold content panes, and like how heavily saturated or not they are with ads, and so on. I don't think it's any coincidence that Google just happens to own Google Analytics, which is the number one by a long shot leader, market leader in terms of that analytics. I mean, just imagine the type of data that they have. They absolutely use user engagement signals like dwell time, bounce rates, maybe not so far as like scroll depth, but they're absolutely using those types of signals quite heavily. Yeah, so that's all I got on that, but I could keep going.
So digging into that a little bit, Chris. So what matters now more than it used to? We talked a little bit about that, but where should I be focusing my attention now as an SEO more than I did 5 years ago, like in terms of ranking factors or things that I can control to improve my SEO performance?
I think you should think more content marketing. So I think it absolutely is about excellent, creating excellent content, but then also think about the wheels behind that content, the distribution of that content, and start thinking about types of content that you could create, or maybe it's not even so much like a blog post piece of content, but think about other types of content that you could create in such a way that it could be link worthy. It's linkable. So that the biggest ever SEO wins that we have ever notched, which were quite impressive. Like we've had clients where you literally couldn't search for any of their terms basically without finding them on the first page. And most of those, there's a link-worthy asset or two behind the scenes that just made our job as SEOs in terms of backlink acquisition, building links, just quite easy. I mean, it's like if you're doing manual backlink outreach and you're saying, hey, let us write a blog post for you. That's a pretty low leverage way to do it, because you don't get very good response rates. And then when you do get a response, you have to turn around and create this custom blog post. It can work. I mean, you could argue that it is worth the squeeze depending on what types of placements you're getting there. But it's a higher leverage thing to do if you can come out with a really useful asset that's link worthy. Much more work and effort up front. Like you should probably test into it in some way to at least have some validation signals from the market that like people are indeed interested in this thing before you drop a lot of money to create something. But in my experience, it, when done well, can absolutely be worth it. So I would say to answer the question, what we should focus on more so is the same old, like continually adding extraordinary value with your content to the users, but think about other content types that may be link worthy, and we can talk about that. And then think about in terms of backlink acquisition, think more of it almost like PR. Almost put like your PR hat on a little bit more and tell a good story. Because like you know, with this whole hey, we'll guest post on your blog, you guest post on our blog, it's just a real commoditized, like, you know, it just lacks differentiation. So I think if you think more like a PR pro, you'll do better in the world of offsite these days.
It makes a lot of sense. So if I'm a marketer and I'm trying to figure out, okay, where am I today and what are my best opportunities? How could I do an SEO health checkup on my own website to see where those opportunities lie?
You can do a SEO health checkup on your website pretty easily and in a few different ways. One is Google Search Console. So if you have Google Search Console set up, you can just log in and look through some of the reports. Like it's pretty clear. Like it'll jump out and say error, like you have all these broken links, or it'll jump out. Um, it'll show you, you know, load speeds and such. But you could also there's a few other things you could do. You could do a site colon. So if you whatever your URL is, say it's, you know, newyorktimes.com. If you do site colon newyorktimes.com with no spaces, no wwws, it basically says, hey Google, show me all the pages that you have indexed for my site. And so when you do that, if you see like weird wonky pages showing up toward the top of that results page, then it means that Google's having trouble understanding the priority of the different pages on your site. Like ideally, when you do that site colon, you want to see your homepage first, then probably your service page or your product page, you know, and then some of those higher uh, higher authority pages ranking. If you're not seeing that, it may indicate that there, you know, is some work to do internally in terms of information architecture and in terms of basically flowing link equity within your site itself. So on-site linking as opposed to off-site linking can be used to address a lot of those issues. Then there's also obviously traffic. You know, you just want to look at your organic traffic. It's difficult to get query data, but you can get it in Google Search Console. So I always want to keep a tab on overall search traffic, but be sure to filter out brand. Like we like to look at brand search traffic from one view and then non-brand in another. And you might not be able to get perfectly at brand. If you have a brand which there's a lot of misspellings and different variations of people that are typing it, and there's, you know, you get a lot of search traffic, like you might not be able to filter every single little query out. But whatever filter you do use, just keep using that one and you know, continue monitoring that metric so that it's a one-to-one. But yeah, so you want to absolutely look at search volumes, but you also want to really look at click-through rates. So if you're seeing, you know, and this is another thing that Search Console is really good at, but you should identify the non-branded queries where your rank or where your click-through rates are really high, and then preview those pages on the search results pages so you can see what they look like, because there's something about that search results page that's getting a high click-through rate.
Yep.
I like to create a filter sometimes where I'm just like, you say, hey, show me non-branded, show me position between, you know, 3 and 7, and then sort that, you know, sort all those queries by click-through rate. And you look at the actual landing page domains, or, you know, the landing page URLs of the ones with really high click-through rates versus really low click-through rates. Because even without owning Google Analytics, Google absolutely can and does measure click-through rates.
This is great. Chris,
That's
Greg had
another way. That's another way, by the way, that little brands can like outsmart big ones. Like if you can get a position on that first page and your page title is just fire, because when you do that Google search result, you see the results, you got the blue headline and then the description text. The blue headline is usually pulled from the page title. So page titles, we used to just basically keyword stuff them. But several years ago, we began writing page titles with keywords in mind, but also the way that we would write a headline for like an ad. Like you wanted to have that hook, you wanted to have that draw power so that you get an outsized share of the overall clicks available.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Greg had a clarification question. Could you explain one more time how you do a site colon search in Search Console?
Sure. Yeah. So just type in site, SITE colon, And then without any spaces, type in your domain, no dub, no spaces, no punctuation, just site : webmechanics.com.
Yep.
Yeah, site : your domain. Another interesting thing that you could do with that site : is you can add other terms. You can do a space after your domain and add whatever term you want. So if you sell, blue widgets, red widgets, green widgets, and say that you wanted to see, like, of your green widgets, which does Google think are, the highest authority pages, you can do site : yoururl.com, then a space, then green or green widgets. And it'll reorder that whole results page to show you just pages that Google finds relevant for green widgets.
That's awesome. Chris, let's drill into, so we talked about on-site and off-site SEO as kind of factors we could influence. Drilling into on-site SEO a bit, what are some of the opportunities there? You mentioned content types, so I definitely want to touch on or hear from you what's working in terms of content types, but also content can be a challenge, frankly, sometimes for a lot of marketers, like getting content, especially if you have subject matter experts who are busy and don't have a lot of time. So I guess, two things are, like, one, like, what are some good content types that marketers can do that, ideally don't take a lot of time from subject matter experts, or that, they can kind of run themselves. And then second is, like, what are some things we can do on site, even if it's not creating new content? Like, what are some other options to improve performance there?
Sure. So creating content, especially creating good content, is like the ultimate, challenge for many brands. And there's no silver bullet. There's no one big silver bullet. And there's a quote from the book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, where he says, "There's no silver bullet, so we're going to have to use a lot of lead ones." So I think that still applies in content, but there are some little hacks and some little workflows and some processes that you can put in place to get a lot more of that content flowing. Most organizations have hidden content. Like, within the walls somewhere, there's content. It's usually unstructured in form, but it exists. It exists sometimes in your email inbox. If you ever find yourself, writing long emails, it exists sometimes in your call logs and your call recorded, in your recorded calls. It exists sometimes in your internal events, your internal trainings, your lunch and learns, things like that. There's content lurking in those walls. So one thing that we like to do right off the bat with clients is say, okay, what content are we already producing that we don't necessarily think of as content? Like, we think that the goal is something else, but that can be reused and repurposed. And what you're seeing right now is an example of that we're doing, right? So we're having this growth clinic, but we're going to take bits and pieces of this, cut it up, chop it up, and just use it to fuel, like 1 hour long seminar like this, or 1 hour long event like this. You could get 10, 20, 30, 40 nice little 10, 20, 30-second clips that can be shared on social. You could take the longer clip, have it transcribed. Like, there's these really inexpensive and good transcription services like rev.com. You can take an hour-long webinar, have it human transcribed. It'll probably cost you like 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks. And then you bring that in, and that's the subject matter expertise right there. So to take that and process it down into a series of blog posts, or, a longer form kind of premium content thing like an ebook or some kind of swipe file or something like that, you don't need that subject matter expert anymore. Now you can do that. Your marketing team, your editor, whoever it is, your SEO maybe even could take that and repackage and repurpose it and give it new life. So most organizations have hidden content lurking, somewhere within the walls. A lot of times it's with the sales team. A lot of times it's, with your internal practice, or with your internal events. but it's somewhere. So I think the first step is to go out and find it.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And as we're working on building that content, what are some things we can do on site in the meantime? Like, are there any opportunities that we can dig up to work with our existing content, for example?
Absolutely. Yeah. So people say that SEO is a long-term game, which it is, and I agree with that. But there's almost always short-term opportunities where like you might not post a 30% like site-wide gain in organic traffic, but there are pages on your site right now which you can go and apply just a little bit of SEO love to make it so that instead of getting 100 visits a month on that page from organic search, you could make that 150 or 200 or 300 even. We call it AWOP, so Anatomy of a Well-Optimized Page, or AWOP. And it's basically our formula for on-page optimization, like how to incorporate the keywords visibly onto the pages. So you probably have on your site right now, like some really amazing content that like nobody ever thought to optimize for search. Like you just skipped that step. Like you didn't do the keyword research. You didn't really apply much SEO on the front. And we have clients that are like content machines, and they just hire us basically as they're pumping out content. We'll absorb the piece of content, do some keyword research, identify what it's about, and apply some small adjustments without really changing the meaning of anything significantly. But by doing that last little extra bit of work, like that extra little 20% of work, is going to get you 80% of the rankings. Like it's just dramatically more likely that a content piece will rank and pull traffic if you do just a little bit of keyword research and just a little bit of on-site optimization. So like anytime we get a new client in the door, like we're eager to prove ourselves. We want to like post a win or two, ideally somewhat frequently. And it's still to this day, even in 2022 and beyond, I think that the opportunity to optimize, revisit, refresh, re-optimize content that's on your site already is a big one. And one trend that you're seeing, not just with SEO, but marketing in general, all the things are merging. Like they've always been interconnected, but they're merging more and more. And a huge example of that is the way that brand search volume is now reportedly, or there's rumors that brand search volume is now becoming like probably the biggest ranking factor, not just on Google search, but also with regard to your social media, your Facebooks, your LinkedIn's. Like if I, from my company page, post something on LinkedIn and I only have 10 followers versus you have 10,000, of course, like you're going to get more distribution than I am. And it's not just because you have 10,000 people that are all going to see it, because that's not usually the case. Like all of your followers are not seeing every single organic social post that you do. But the reason is because right out of the gate, as soon as you push publish and I push publish, it goes through a little algorithmic filter that says how credible, how trustworthy is this? And if if one scores better than the other, it's just automatically going to get more distribution before any other signals. So where was I going with that exactly? I forget. Oh yeah. So here's another example of how things are merging, right? So we know now that engagement metrics on a page, dwell time, click-through rates, bounce rates are a negative thing, but engagement rates on a page are now a key ranking factor. So before, it used to be you would just revisit your content and insert keywords and you would get more traffic. You can still do that. That still works. But you can also do other things like solve for bounce rates. One of my favorite things to do is find long form blog posts that are pulling traffic but not conversions. And a lot of times you'll find this is a real long blog post where there's not even an attempt at a conversion. There's not even a call out. There's not even an offer of any type. But I promise you that if you say that your blog post is about green widgets and it's a long one and you're getting traffic but not conversions, if you go through and somewhere on that page insert just like an inline call out, just like do a couple line breaks, a little table, in there and just say, hey, you interested in green widgets? You'd really like this other thing, and either link to it or, capture an email or do whatever you have. But you're giving the cohort of people that are ready for that next level offer the opportunity to do something, and thereby creating engagement.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. So let's say that I've covered the on-site stuff, right? So I'm getting creative with how I get content for my SMEs, but I'm also leveraging my on-site content, improving the engagement scores, the site experience, to get all those ranking factors up. I'm curious now to turn our attention to off-site SEO. Like, what are some things we can do um, in terms of building backlinks? Why is it important today? What are some ways we can build backlinks today? And what can we do that's not too much of a heavy lift to start?
So there was somebody, I think it might have been Rand Fishkin or somebody, who popularized this hashtag RCS, or real company stuff. So chances are you're already doing stuff like real company stuff, sponsoring events, advertising in magazines or newspapers. Like, you have vendors that you're working with, you have places that you're posting your jobs, you're hiring with. Like, you're doing real company stuff. You're probably generating links just automatically. So lean into those things. Like any basically brand is doing real company stuff. So there's these different entities that all have websites that we're interacting with, we're transacting with. They're already linking to us, some of them naturally. Applying a little bit of pressure to those channels, you can get more links, but also better links. Like, folks, like if you look at the sites that are linking to you right now, you'll see a variety of different link anchor text. Like, some are just saying, click here. A lot will be using the link anchor text, which is your brand name. But even just having a few links pointing back with keyword dense anchor text, and or like language directly around, like before or after the actual anchor text of a link that has some of your primary keywords like around that link, is quite possible and will also be quite beneficial in terms of ranking on those terms. So I think at the end of the day, real company stuff, it comes down to thinking more PR, less like, I'll pay you $50 for a link.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. So a couple more questions and we'll get into some Q&A, because I think crew here has a lot of questions to cover today. So what are some common mistakes you still see marketers making in 2022 with SEO?
I mean, a big one is blind blogging, is what I call it, where people are diligently creating content, and even good content, but just not doing it with the keyword research and with the SEO foresight to make it rank. And I feel honestly really bad about it, because companies are spending a lot of time, people spend their entire day sometimes like creating this awesome content, and it's good. It's just like, let's put wheels on it. Like, if you're going to spend 10 hours on a piece of content, like, I spend at least an hour maybe on just some basic, on page old school SEO. I don't care what Google says. Google says, hey, exact match domains don't work. You don't need the keyword in your URL anymore. We're less reliant on page titles, headlines, latent semantics. They lie sometimes, or they over exaggerate. Like, you still see the basic tactics of like having a primary target keyword for this page along with a group of secondary keywords, and optimize those key SEO points for that primary. So whatever that primary, so you'll have one primary, 3 or 4 secondaries, which are usually modifiers or more specific, like longer tail phrases to that primary. But if that primary is in the page title with a hook that makes it click worthy, and if it's in the URL, and if it exists in the description, again, with a nice click worthy hook, and in the headline, and in the first 100 or 200 characters of copy, and is sprinkled out throughout the thing, and is contained in the link of an anchor text, or in the anchor text of a link, and there's other pages on your site which you point links to the net new page using anchor text that's either the primary target or one of the secondaries, like, it's going to rank. like you're going to get more traffic that way. It's like physics, you know, like you're going to get more traffic to your content that way, more distribution for your content that way. And I think it really just makes sense to invest that extra 10%.
100%. All right, last question. So let's talk tools. You know, what are the top 3 to 5 tools if I'm a marketer I should have in my toolkit for SEO?
I mean, I think Google Search Console, honestly, is like the big one. You need a really good keyword research tool. So Ahrefs is pretty good. SEMrush is good. Even the Google Keyword Planner is decent. Market Samurai is one of my favorites. But you need a really good keyword research tool. You need Google Search Console. The Lighthouse DevTools debugger is good for Core Web Vitals. Yeah, took the words right out of my mouth. And I think that, you know, pretty much is all you need. Like some of our clients have these enterprise level, like Bright Edge and like SEO Clarity, and they're good. Like they can be useful, but I don't find them to be, like, all things considered, really worth the price tag, because some of them are like $5,000 a month or $10,000 a month. So I don't necessarily buy into those like super premium ones, or maybe I'm just not using them right. I think just a good old fashioned Google Search Console, some reliable keyword research tool, and then the Lighthouse debugger. I think it's pretty much all you need.
Love it. Very good. Cool. So let's jump into some Q&A. I want to start with Sasha, and then I know Shashank has a question, and then we'll go to Robert. But Sasha, before the clinic today, had a really great question around you know, putting content on your main domain versus different domains. Sasha, do you want to jump on real quick and kind of talk us through?
Sure, thank you. It was a debate actually with someone else that's in marketing, and we were chatting about whether, so we have like our main domain, right? And then we have a bunch of interior pages. And I think, I'm trying to phrase it so it's not confusing, is how much of an impact does page authority, or really it's not page authority, because it's more of SEO strength, I guess, or the words we rank for and where we show up in Google's ranking. Is there a difference whether this interior page is a sub of our big domain, or does it help significantly if it was to be its own subdomain, if that makes sense? So, and I think I'm familiar with like the domain authority versus page authority, but I'm wondering for SEO strategy, is there really a difference where it lives, if that makes sense?
I would say yes, there is a difference of where it lives. So if you, so I know you guys, I know that you're a pretty, you know, trustworthy brand. So your domain has high domain authority. And the simplest way to pass some of that authority through is to think in terms of the number of clicks away from the home page it is. It's like the number one thing that you could do, which is kind of the easiest, so it's good news for you, is basically build a link to that page that you want to give authority to from the home page as a text link. Like that in and of itself will just immediately send a jolt of like, whoa, wake up, Google, like something's going on with this page. If you have a bunch of, like, if you have hundreds of links on your homepage that were put there kind of indiscriminately, you might want to remove some of those links, because think of your homepage as like the mecca of your domain authority. And so if you're, you know, linking out to 100 different pages, then you're sending some of your authority to each of those 100 pages. But if you only link to 10 pages, then all of that authority is concentrated into those 10 pages.
Got it.
I think Google will tell you that they treat a subdomain as its own separate domain, meaning that it doesn't inherit any of the mother or of the root domain's authority. I think that's one of those things they're kind of lying about, because I have seen brand new subdomains on highly authoritative sites like rank almost instantly. I think the worst thing that you could do would be like to create a brand new domain, like net new, you know, that's not even on the root domain, would be the last option.
Okay.
So yeah, what I would probably do is like think in terms of information architecture. You want to have that, like it's most likely accessible via one link or via one click from the nav, like if you have a fly out navigation, but it's speaks more if it's contained within a text link. So I'd basically build a link to it from the homepage, then do a site colon, and maybe put a modifying term on the site colon if you want, but one way or the other, do a site colon to understanding which pages Google thinks are the most authoritative, and then look through those pages. And if you can do that same activity where you're building a link to the target page and also just minding the other links that you have and maybe removing some that that aren't necessary or overly useful or overly clicked on, that's probably the first thing that I would do. And then I would look externally to do a similar thing and to build some links to that target page via external sources or third-party sites.
Okay. Cool. That helps a lot. That answers. I was thinking if it's homepage, and then you answered about the navigation versus a text link. So awesome. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So next up is Shashank. So Shashank had a question around the latest product review update made by Google, and link to it in the chat, Chris, so you can see it. But basically, it looks like it's an update around basically the credibility of product reviews, right? Shashank, did you have anything to add to that, or was that pretty much you were trying to figure out?
So this, I have not seen this.
Basically reviews home quality reviews, right? And this new product review update has kind of become the talking point among most of the review sites. So we want to know what we can do to capitalize on the new updates that Google has brought about to make sure that we are not left behind with the new rules that are coming in. So any advice on that would be very, very helpful.
Absolutely. Well, I like to, this is the first time I'm seeing this. I'm not familiar with this particular update, but I always do love to read Google's documentation and to read it kind of reading between the lines. But it goes back to basically trustworthiness and credibility. So anytime, like even without SEO, just from like a user experience perspective, if we're doing a new site and we are including like testimonials just on the site pages for UX and conversion purposes, not even for SEO purposes, we always seek to make that testimonial as believable as possible. So just sharing a quote is one thing, but to share a quote and a headshot and the first and last name of the person who said that quote and their title and the company they work for and a link to that, you know, individual customer's LinkedIn profile or whatever it is, that's a much more believable review and a much more trustworthy review than it would be if it were just the text of whatever the quote was. So in just scanning this, you know, quickly, that's my take, is basically to do whatever it is or do whatever you can to make those reviews more believable. And I hope that helps. I know it's not an area of
one tactical thing you might do is consider incentivizing your reviewers to leave rich media reviews. So video, audio, you know, not necessarily incentivize them just for the review, but if they go above and beyond and, you know, leave that rich media that shows, hey, this is a real review. This isn't something that was spun up with a review spinner and posted on the site. You know, that'll help, right? That'll incentivize your customers to go the extra mile and give that extra feedback. Maybe it's like a discount coupon or whatever it is, but, you know, that'll, you know, create more of that user generated review content that Google's looking to see with this update.
Yeah, like you know how Amazon on some of the reviews, it'll have the little tag that says verified purchase.
Yeah.
So that's like that's a trust signal right there. So I don't know, you know, in your situation specifically where you're housing these reviews, if they're on your site or if they're on a third-party site. But think like Amazon, like, hey, is this a verified review? And if you don't have any type of process that you are using to verify the authenticity of those reviews, do that, and then in doing so, you'll find ways, I'm sure, to make it more trustworthy, because it will be more trustworthy at that point.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Jared. That was helpful. Thank you.
Great.
Absolutely. Robert has a question. Could you explain core web vitals? Robert, was there anything you wanted to add to that question, or just looking for a general overview?
No, I guess my understanding is that core web vitals are more about page speed, but that's always been a factor with Google. So what's different besides just load time?
So Core Web Vitals is an attempt by Google, a heavy-handed attempt by Google, to take all these various ranking factors to really solidify them and to group them all into the user experience bucket. So Google's first and foremost mission is basically to document and make available the world's information. So on the one side of the user experience coin is the information. Is the information useful? Is it trustworthy? Is it credible, etc.? So that's where a lot of their effort has been. Over the last 5 to 7 years, they've started talking about load speeds. They've started talking about engagements. Core Web Vitals, I think, is their way to organize it, for the webmasters, so that they can, see a document and see the specific advice that Google's issuing on these issues all in one place. Came also with the Lighthouse Debugger tool, which is really useful, that you can access by right-clicking, view page source, and then in the developer tools. So those are the best signals of what else changes. So they look at load speeds a little bit more specifically. They also look at things like above the fold or the first content pane and the load speeds and the content contained within those. But I think it's really more so than anything just Google's declaration that, like, this user experience stuff isn't going away. If you still want our traffic, like, you've got to upgrade to the latest, the latest renderability best practices, which load speed is a big part of. So load speed, the rendering on the page across different devices, and a lot of other factors. The media itself, the accessibility of that media, how how accessible and usable it is to people that are disabled, or people on certain kind of legacy devices. But if you have not yet checked out the Lighthouse Debugger, that would probably be the place that I would start, because that gives you like a pretty detailed report on your own site about the issues that need to be addressed, and it's free.
Yep. One tactical thing I would add about Core Web Vitals is one of the big metrics Google is looking at with that is what they call first contentful paint. They're looking basically how quickly will the visual aspect of your website render, right? So how quickly can I as a user engage with your website? So one thing you can do is look at what different scripts are loading on your site. If you find there's one script that's not related to the actual rendering of the site, that is loading above the site itself and slowing down your first contentful paint, you can change the order in which that loads so that the site experience itself renders faster. So that's one thing you can do to make sure that the users are getting to the experience faster, so you satisfy those Core Web Vitals requirements while still getting those other marketing scripts and things you want going on the site as well. Cool. Great question. Thank you, Robert. Kinda had a really good question. So if we're looking to create pillar pages, is there a backlink strategy we should follow? For example, how many backlinks should we aim to create in the first 6 months? Chris, any thoughts on pillar page strategy?
Well, in terms of link velocity, the ideal would be to have it look natural. So if it was not like if the pillar page that you're creating is naturally just an amazing piece of like link worthy content, then the way it would shape out usually is in an accelerating pattern, right? Like you would get a link or 2 links, and then you would get 3 or 4, and it would kind of accelerate. That's going to be hard to pull off, right? Like, so I would say for your purposes, like any links that you're able to build, I would, start building them as soon as possible, but also plan for a little bit later on, like months 2, 3, 4, to try to get, an accelerating volume of those. But the way that you link your pages internally is also quite important. So for instance, like if you look at all your pages and all the third-party links pointing to them, there's probably going to be a few standouts. Like your homepage will be a standout. You might have 1 or 2 other highly linked pieces of content. So those are all inheriting a lot of domain authority. And the cool thing about pillar pages is that they're structured in such a way where you can flow the link equity, from some of the tier 2 and tier 3 supporting pages back up to the main pillar page. And likewise, from your other heavily linked content, you could build links internally either to that pillar page directly, or because you've set your tier 2 and tier 3 pages up that they all link back to the mother pillar page, you could even build links to the supporting pages and thereby flow link equity back up to that pillar page. So I would think about, obviously you want to make that pillar page link worthy, but even if you can make even one of the supporting pages very link worthy, so that you can build links to that supporting page, which then flows back to the tier 1 pillar page, like the highest level page, then you'll flow that link equity automatically back up to it. So I think, to summarize, internal linking, I think, is a big part of the battle, especially if you work at a large brand that's highly credible. Like you may not need to do much external link building at all. So setting the internal pages up to link back, flowing some link equity from your more heavily linked pages, and then if possible to create some kind of really link worthy content, maybe a quiz of some sort that has a valuable output, or a giveaway, or anything that you can do on some of those supporting pages that would be a natural draw for links, will put you in a pretty good spot.
Kind of, was that helpful? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was super helpful. Actually, are we going to get a recording of this?
Yep, we'll be posting it up on our
okay.
YouTube, and we'll send it out.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you
Got it.
so much.
For sure. Awesome. Well, we got about 5 minutes left. Any other questions? SEO, burning SEO questions, content questions?
I love SEO. It'll always have a near and dear place to my heart because it's how I got started. And I remember I had this little niche website. It was like in a health related niche. And I remember when I first started, I was just publishing content. I wasn't doing anything else. I was just doing keyword research, publishing content. And after I'd published like 5 or 6 pages, I remember checking the analytics, which this was before Google Analytics. It was just the log data. And I was like, holy crap, I got 72 visitors. And like some of them were from Australia and New Orleans and Canada and all. It's like, whoa. And that was the moment that my eyes opened. It was like, wow, you can get free traffic. All you gotta do is write articles.
I have a question. So what would be your advice for I guess like a small business who is wanting to kind of increase traffic to their website, but the words that they want to rank for are highly competitive? What are some of the strategies that or advice that you would give to kind of like a small business owner? I'm thinking about my sister who owns the spin studio. And so I'm just kind of thinking of kind of ways to kind of help kind of with that.
What kind of business does she own?
She has a spin studio.
Oh, a spin studio.
Outside outside of, well, in Randallstown, so it's outside of Baltimore. But I know that with highly competitive keywords, you want to kind of start earlier than later to kind of build. But at the same time, there are probably other bigger spin studios that are ranking for certain keywords. So what are some of the, I guess, strategies just to kind of differentiate yourself?
So that goes in the local SEO bucket for me, because a lot of that traffic is going to be like near me terms or like geo-specific terms. So I'd really over-index into whatever Google calls it these days, Google My Business, or Google, used to be Google Local, or whatever it's called these days. Like, you'd want to definitely set your profile up there, make sure that the name, address, and phone number is exactly how it appears in other places. So if it's 1234 something drive and you spell the whole word out drive, like, do that consistently. Don't do DR, don't do, different variations of it. Keep that NAP, the name, address, phone number, really, really consistent. And then to the point of the gentleman's question earlier with the reviews, I'd really index on getting a lot of like really good, really highly credible and trustworthy reviews. And that's something that happens, in person. Like, when she has a really happy customer, it'd be great if you could give them a postcard and just be like, yo, let them go and do a review, maybe incentivize it in some way, or say, hey, if you post a selfie of yourself in the club, like, you'll get a free session or whatever. Because then I think the biggest ranking factor probably in that will be that Google My Business. And the good news is that if there's a big old brand that is really bad at doing that and you're really good at doing that, you could actually theoretically knock them off the block. Like, if you have a really good process for getting high quality, trustworthy reviews and the other one doesn't, then that's a big step ahead. But regardless of the space and how competitive it is, I always want to know what the top 5 or 10 like highest traffic, most competitive terms are. And I usually will want to set up a page on the site for each of those terms, targeting each of those terms. Because even if you're not ranking, on that term itself, there's definitely long tail searches, but if you're doing the review process and you're generating reviews with a decent velocity, then your ranking power is going to grow over time. So I'd say, like, what are the top 10 highest traffic or, highest volume, kind of dream come true? If we could rank on anything, these are the ones we'd want to rank for. Let's get pages developed for those, or how can we develop pages for those that could be linked from the homepage in a way that it would make sense and be a good user experience. And then each of those 5 to 10 really high volume terms will have a dozen or 2 dozen or 3 dozen longer tail terms. And so those longer tail terms will become the targets for the future pages that you build to kind of support the pillar pages.
Got it. Is there ever an instance where long tail keywords would be the primary keyword? I mean, well, probably. Yeah,
absolutely.
But do they mostly in your work do they mostly serve as supporting roles, or is that changing with voice search? Like, how does that kind of all work together? Because if someone is searching like voice, then they're probably searching in a more conversational way rather than like one word. They're probably using multiple words, or so how does all that kind of work together? Yeah.
So I'm a little bit unclear on the question itself, but but one thing, like, definitely get Google Search Console set up, and that will show you the queries. So if you're finding a query within Google Search Console, you got to kind of put your Sherlock Holmes hat on and kind of think like a investigator a little bit, because you won't see the query a lot, because by most likely you're not going to have it contained on the site. But like, as you're scrolling through the logs, like, say that you see something like kid friendly, like you just see it randomly once, like you don't see it a whole lot, which means you're probably not ranking for it, but you just showed up for it at one point. So look at those search logs to get clues about what people are actually searching for. And then, like, if kid friendly is actually something, you don't necessarily need to create a whole new page about kid friendly, but instead look at the page that ranked on that term and just go back and add a little bit more content, emphasizing the kid friendliness. You might think about other related terms like ages, like somebody that's kid friendly might be concerned about toddlers or 3-year-olds or whatever. So you might try to incorporate some language around that. They might also search for things like whatever daycare or babysitter or any other types of terms that you can think as synonymous or related ones that other folks might search for. Just include that type of language within whatever page that's ranking as a first step.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right, y'all. Well, we're a little bit over time here. Sorry for keeping you long, but it was a nice session. I think this was a record in terms of turnout so far.
Yeah, awesome questions. Thank you guys. Really love the participation, and yeah, really good discussion.
Yeah, so we appreciate you guys, and we will see you next week.
See you then.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.